They escorted her out of the building at 4:47 p.m. on Christmas Eve. The security guard on her left was named Kelvin. She knew because she had brought him groundnut soup in a Tupperware container every Thursday for 2 years and 9 months. He did not look at her once during the walk. He kept his eyes on the glass doors at the end of the corridor, and his hands were clasped behind his back the way a man holds himself when he knows he is doing something he does not want to do. The woman behind the reception desk watched from above her computer screen. Her name was Blessing, which was the name on the laminated badge clipped to her collar, and she had borrowed $3,000 from the woman being escorted out 4 months ago and never returned it. She did not wave. She did not speak. She turned back to her screen. Outside, the December harmattan had turned the sky the color of old paper, and the air smelled of exhaust fumes and the dry red dust that had blown in from somewhere north. The woman whose name was on the termination letter tucked inside her handbag did not cry. She stood on the pavement in front of Meridian Continental Holdings on Victoria Island for 3 minutes and 40 seconds. Then she picked up the phone and called the only number she trusted. What the person on the other end of that line already knew was something that would take the next 14 days to fully become visible. But it would become visible. Her name was Adaize Mensah Okafor, and she was 38 years old, and she weighed 54 kilograms, which was 6 kilograms less than she had weighed the year her mother died. Because the year her mother died was also the year she had stopped buying herself lunch, so her 2 younger brothers in Enugu could continue to pay their polytechnic fees. She had worked at Meridian Continental Holdings for 9 years and 4 months. She had been the operations coordinator for the last 6 of those years, which meant that she was the person who knew where every file was, which vendor had to be paid before the 15th or the penalty clause would activate, and how to run payroll when the system crashed, which it did every 3rd month like clockwork. She was the person you called at 11:30 p.m. when the Lagos Customs clearance had stalled and the container needed to move by morning. She had answered every one of those calls. She had answered them from hospitals, from her mother's bedside, from a flooded road in Surulere with rain coming through the car window she could not close because the motor had burned out, and she had not yet saved enough to fix it. She dressed carefully every morning. That morning, the morning of December 24th, she had put on the dark green blouse she had bought from a woman at Balagoon Market for $4,500, ironed the night before, and hung on the back of the bathroom door so it would not crease. She had polished her black flat shoes with a cloth and petroleum jelly because she had no proper shoe polish. The shoes were 3 years old, and the leather was beginning to separate at the left toe. But she had pressed it back with a small strip of black electrical tape that was invisible unless you were looking directly at the ground. She was not a woman who announced her circumstances. She was a woman who managed them. She carried, every day, a small cloth purse her mother had sewn in 1998 from leftover Ankara fabric. The purse was faded at the corners and the zipper had been replaced twice, but it was the kind of object that carries so much weight from being held so many times that it feels warm even when the room is cold. Inside it, on that morning, she had her phone, her transit card, $2,300, a folded piece of paper with her brother's school fees schedule, and a pen. She had been taking notes in meetings for 9 years. Her handwriting was small and even, the way a person writes when they know paper is not limitless. Her goal was simple. She was not trying to become rich. She was not trying to win. She was trying to keep her brothers in school until July, which was when the older one, Tobena, would graduate with his HND in mechanical engineering. 14 weeks. That was all she needed. 14 more weeks of salary, and then Tobena would find work, and the weight would shift. She had been carrying it alone for 4 years, and she had never told either of her brothers how thin the margin had become. She was that kind of woman. The man who signed the termination letter was Gerald Obina, managing director, whose name she had written on 412 memos in 9 years. He had not signed it in front of her. His personal assistant had called her to the 4th floor at 4:19 p.m. and handed her an envelope from across the desk. The assistant, whose name was Funky, had the practiced expression of someone delivering information she had been rehearsed to deliver without feeling. She said, "Your employment with Meridian is being terminated effective today. You have been asked to clear your personal effects and hand in your access card by close of business." She pushed a second envelope across the desk. "Your severance letter is inside. 2 months' salary is per your contract clause." She said, "Mr. Obina extends his appreciation for your service." That was the phrase she used. His appreciation. For her service. As though 9 years and 4 months of 11:30 p.m. phone calls could be folded into one sentence and placed in an envelope. Adeze had looked at the envelope. Then she had looked at Funky. Then she had said, "Is there a reason given?" Funky looked down at the desk. She said, "Restructuring." Adeze pressed her palm flat against the surface of the desk, very gently, as if she were checking whether it was real. Then she stood, took both envelopes, thanked Funky by name, and walked to her office to pack the 3 things she had brought from home. The cloth purse, a photograph of her mother in front of their house in Enugu, and a blue ceramic mug that had a chip at the rim because she had once knocked it against the office fan when she was on a call at midnight and needed both hands. The Christmas tree in the lobby was 3 meters tall and decorated with gold and white baubles, and someone had left a cup of Ribena on the floor near the base of it, and the red had stained the fake snow at the bottom, and nobody had cleaned it up. She noticed all of this on her way out. Kelvin held the door. It was 4:51 p.m. She walked to the bus stop on Adiola Odeku Street and sat on the low concrete barrier at the edge of the road. The harmattan had dried the back of her throat, and her eyes felt raw the way they do when a wind carries dust for a long time. A Danfo bus groaned past with its sliding door open, and the conductor shouted a destination she was not going to. The traffic on Victoria Island was solid from the junction all the way to the bridge, a long line of car roofs shimmering slightly in the late afternoon heat. She took out the termination letter and read it. 2 months' salary. Clause 9 of her employment contract. She had helped draft that contract 4 years ago, when the company was restructuring the HR documents, and Gerald had asked her to sit in on the legal consultation because she had a better memory for detail than anyone else in the room. She counted what 2 months' salary would cover. School fees for Tabena, $87,000. Rent arrears, $65,000. Electricity bill, $18,400. The LASMA fine from the car impoundment in November, which she was still paying in installments, $9,000 remaining. By her calculation, 2 months' salary would leave $4,300 after those obligations. $4,300 to eat, to transport, to find another job. She had done harder arithmetic than this before. She put the letter back in the envelope. She pressed the cloth purse against her side and made the phone call. The number she called belonged to a man named Emmanuel Akabi, and he was her father's oldest friend, and he was the only person in Lagos who had known her before her mother died and before the weight had settled. He answered on the second ring. She told him what had happened in 2 sentences. He listened. There was a silence of approximately 4 seconds, which was not nothing. Emmanuel Akabe was not a man who used 4 seconds of silence without a reason. Then he said, "Come on Thursday." He did not explain why. She said, "I will." He said nothing else, and the call ended. If this story is already making your blood warm, subscribe to the channel because what happens next is something Adaeze herself never saw coming. The evening of December 24th, she called a woman named Pauline, who had been HR manager at Meridian 5 years ago, and who had left under circumstances that people in the office had discussed in low voices for about 2 weeks, and then stopped discussing. Pauline picked up on the 4th ring. When Adaeze told her, Pauline was quiet. Then she said, "The restructuring." Yes, a pause. Did he say what position was being restructured? Adaeze said, "No." Pauline said, "Because there isn't one. Kolade from accounts is moving into your role on the 2nd of January. I heard it last week from someone still inside." She said it quietly, the way people say things they are sorry to know. Adaeze thanked her and ended the call and set the phone face down on the mattress. So it was not restructuring, it was replacement. There was a difference between those two things, and the difference was legally significant, and she knew it because she had sat in on the legal consultation 4 years ago. She did not sleep until 2:37 in the morning. She lay on her side and listened to the neighbor's generator run its cycle and cut out and run again, the way it did every night, and to the sound of Christmas music from somewhere down the street, faint enough that she could not identify the song, only the shape of it, the rise and fall of something meant to be joyful that had traveled far enough to lose its words. She spent Wednesday doing 3 things. She updated her CV on her phone between 6 and 8:30 in the morning, sitting on the floor of her bedroom with her back against the bed because her table was occupied by the ironing board she had not put away. She made jollof rice from a cup of rice and 2 tomatoes and ate half and left the rest. She sat with Tobena's fees schedule and looked at it for 11 minutes without writing anything down. Then she folded it and put it in the cloth purse. She had never missed a payment. She did not intend to start now, though she had not yet determined how she would prevent it. On the morning of the 26th, she went to the corner business center and printed 7 copies of her updated CV on paper that cost $50 per page. The man at the center, whose name she did not know, had a small Christmas tree on the corner of his desk made from green painted wire. He handed her the copies without looking up from his phone. She carried them home in a polythene bag and placed them on the ironing board, which she had finally moved to the corner. She sent 3 applications by email from her phone before noon. She received 2 automated acknowledgement replies and 1 that bounced. That was when the second thing happened. Her landlord sent a message at 1:16 p.m. She had been 2 weeks from paying the outstanding $65,000, and he had been patient because she had always been a reliable tenant for 6 years and 4 months. The message said that due to the building renovations beginning in January, all tenants needed to indicate their renewal intention with a full year's rent paid in advance by January 15th, or the units would be released to new tenants. A full year's rent in advance by January 15th. She sat with the phone in her hand and read the message 3 times. The ironing board was in the corner. The CV copies were on it. 7 of them, on 50 per page paper, printed on a morning after a night when she had not slept until 2:37. On Thursday morning she dressed in her good green blouse again, ironed again. Same shoes with the same electrical tape at the left toe, and took 3 buses to Ikoyi, which was a neighborhood she did not often have occasion to visit. Emmanuel Akebe lived in a house set back from Bourdian Road behind a white wall with a red bougainvillea growing over the top of it. The security man at the gate recognized her name and opened the gate without making her wait. She noticed this. A woman who had spent 9 years reading organizations could read the meaning of an unremarkable gate into a house and a security man who did not make her wait. The living room was quiet and full of books. The books were organized not by subject, but by something she could not immediately identify. She stood in the center of the room while Emmanuel's housekeeper went to fetch him, and she looked at the shelves. After about 90 seconds, she understood the system. He had organized them by the decade in which the stories they told had taken place, 1900 to 1930 on the top shelf. The arrangement of a person who thought about time as a shape. Emmanuel Akebe was 71 years old and moved with the deliberate care of a man who had decided a long time ago never to hurry. He came into the room smelling of eucalyptus oil and old soap, and he sat in the chair across from her and placed his hands on his knees. He looked at her for a moment, the way someone looks at a person they are checking on, not a person they are examining. Then he said, "Tell me what you remember about your father." She told him what she knew. Dr. Chukwuemeka Mensah had died when she was 11. He had been a structural engineer. He had worked on government contracts in the 80s and early 90s. Her mother had kept his papers in a green metal box under the bed, and when she died, Adeze had kept the box but had not opened it in 6 years, because the box contained the kind of objects that take something from you when you handle them. His handwriting on document covers, his signature on things. Emmanuel listened to everything without interrupting. When she finished, he said, "Did your mother ever mention Meridian Continental?" She said no, and then stopped, because she was remembering something she had not thought about in a long time. When she was first hired at Meridian 9 years ago, she had told her mother on the phone, and her mother had said nothing for a moment that had felt like a moment too long. She had put it down at the time to the connection or to her mother's tiredness. She had not put it down to anything else. Emmanuel rose and went to his study. He came back carrying a green metal box. It was not the same green metal box. It was a different one, larger. He set it on the table between them, and he unlocked it with a key he had taken from his shirt pocket. And he placed on the table between them a folder of documents, a land registry certificate from 1991, and a letter typed on paper that had browned at the edges. The letter was addressed to a man named Gerald Obinna, Senior Contracts Manager, Meridian Continental Holdings. It was dated September 3, 1993. It had been written by her father. It described, in the careful, precise language of an engineer who was also apparently a man who had understood that documents mattered, a payment agreement, 18% of future profits from the Victoria Island Development Project, in exchange for Dr. Mensah's proprietary structural calculations, which had made the project viable and which the company had used in full. The payment had been made once. For 3 years, and then Gerald Obinna had been promoted to Deputy Managing Director, and the payments had stopped, and her father's letters requesting the resumption of the agreement had been met with letters from the company's lawyers disputing the authenticity of the original arrangement. Her father had died 14 months after the last lawyer's letter. He had been 44 years old. She had been 11. She had spent the next 27 years not knowing what the weight on her shoulders was made of. Emmanuel placed one more document on the table, a legal opinion commissioned 6 months ago. 6 months ago, which meant Emmanuel Akebe had been moving on this for 6 months, quietly, without telling her, in the way of a person who had been watching and waiting for the right moment. The opinion stated that the original payment agreement constituted a binding instrument under the 1990 Contract Act, and that the estate of Dr. Chukwuemeka Mensah had a legitimate claim to back payments and damages, calculated at current value of $347 million. Adeze set down the document. She looked at the bougainvillea through the window. The flowers were the deep pink of something that has no idea it is being looked at. She pressed her palm flat against the surface of the table, the same gesture she had made against Funke's desk on Christmas Eve, checking whether it was real. 347 million naira. And the man whose company owed it to her estate had signed her termination letter 6 days ago. She did not speak for 2 minutes. Emmanuel did not speak either. He had a mug of ginger tea on the armrest of his chair, and he lifted it and held it in both hands but did not drink from it. Then she said, "He didn't know." It was not a question. Emmanuel said, "He doesn't know your surname." She thought about that. She had been hired under Mensa Okafor, which combined her father's name with her mother's family name. Gerald Obinna had called her a Daize in 9 years and had never once associated the name Mensa with the Dr. Mensa in the documents from 1993. He had fired a woman whose name he had written on 412 memos, and he had not known whose daughter she was. Emmanuel said, "There is a barrister. His name is Kolade Eduke. He has been holding this file." He said, "The case is ready to file." He said nothing else, because nothing else was necessary. She took the bus home the same way she had come. 3 buses, 2 hours and 11 minutes, carrying in her cloth purse the photocopied summary Emmanuel had made for her. The harmattan was beginning to ease slightly, the sky clearing from dust white to a flat gray that smelled of rain that had not yet arrived. She ate the second half of the jollof rice when she got home. She did not sleep well. She lay in the dark and felt the shape of the thing, 9 years inside the company that had taken her father apart from a distance. 9 years of 11:30 p.m., phone calls and 4,500 blouses ironed carefully, and shoes with electrical tape at the toe. And all of it sitting directly on top of something that had been owed since before she understood what owing was. By January 11th, 17 days after she was escorted out by a man who would not look at her, the legal notice had been formally served on Meridian Continental Holdings. The barrister filed at the Federal High Court in Lagos. The cause of action was breach of contract, unjust enrichment, and misappropriation of intellectual property. The defendant was named. Gerald Obinna's personal assistant called him at 7:43 a.m. On the morning the courier arrived, she heard later, from someone who had been in the building, that he had sat down on the couch in his office and had stayed there without speaking for a very long time. The case was not settled quickly. Cases like this are never settled quickly, which is how it should be, because things that took 30 years to accumulate should not be resolved in an afternoon. But 3 things happened before the settlement was reached. The first was that the legal filing became public record, which meant the story of Dr. Mensa's calculations and the company's 30-year silence became visible to people who read public records. The second was that Meridian Continental's board of directors initiated an internal review, which is what boards do when they become aware that a liability has been sitting inside their company since before some of their members were born. The third was that Gerald Obinna's position as managing director was suspended during the review, which was announced via a statement that used the word administrative 6 times. Adaize did not attend any of this. She was in Enugu for 2 weeks in February, which was the first time she had been home in 14 months. She sat in the yard of her mother's house, which was her house now, and she watched Tobenna work on a motorcycle engine he had borrowed to practice on. And she ate egusi soup with pounded yam that he had made himself because he had learned to cook the year their mother died and had never stopped. She told him everything on the 3rd evening, sitting on the low concrete bench near the mango tree their father had planted. Tobenna listened the way people listen to news that rearranges the past. Very still, very careful, not sure yet where the pieces will land. Then he said, "He was protecting us the whole time." even from documents. She thought about her father, who had been 44, who had written letters in careful language that had gone unanswered, who had organized his records well enough that they survived 31 years and found their way to the right hands. She thought about the green metal box under her mother's bed that she had not opened in 6 years. Yes, she said, he was. The settlement was reached in the 3rd month. The terms were sealed, which means the number belongs to her and not to anyone who reads documents for interest. What is not sealed is the structural change the board required as a condition of internal resolution. A formal acknowledgement of the original payment agreement entered into the company's records with Dr. Chukwuemeka Mensah's name restored to the documentation of the Victoria Island project he had made possible. His name in the records, where it had always belonged. Tobena graduated in July, as planned. He found work with an engineering firm in Port Harcourt by September. Adeze paid the rent arrears and the LASMA fine and the electricity bill, and she did not calculate the remainder with a pen on paper. She kept the cloth purse her mother had sewn. She replaced the zipper for the 3rd time. She still carries it. Gerald Obinna did not know, on Christmas Eve, that the woman he had walked out of his building was the daughter of the man his company had been hiding from since 1996. He did not know that the quiet coordinator who arrived early and left late and brought groundnut soup to the security man every Thursday was carrying something that could not be terminated. He had confused the stillness with smallness. He had looked at the ironed 4,500 blouse and the shoes with the electrical tape and the envelope he did not have to hand over himself. And he had seen a woman it was easy to let go. He had not seen a woman who had been sitting for 9 years on the floor of the house that someone owed her. There are people the world mistakes for background. They are not background. They are the architecture. They are the calculations that made the structure possible, and when you remove the paper from the wall does not disappear. You only discover, too late, what was holding it up. What Gerald Obinna removed from his building on Christmas Eve was the only person in that building who had already read the clause that would become the most expensive document in his company's history. He handed her an envelope containing 2 months' salary. She walked out, carrying a cloth purse her mother had sewn in 1998. And inside the purse was a pen she had used to take notes in his meetings for 9 years, and those notes would eventually end up in the hands of a barrister named Kolade Edukie, who had been waiting for exactly this kind of record. The world does not always recognize what it is standing in the presence of. Some things cannot be terminated. A skill. A record, a name that was supposed to disappear from the documents, and didn't. A daughter who learned her father's handwriting from letters in a green metal box and spent 9 years inside the company that had spent 30 trying to forget him. You can escort a person out of the building. You can hand them an envelope with your appreciation inside. You can turn your access card readers off and update the system to remove their name. But you cannot erase what they carry inside their hands, and you cannot unhire the people who already know where everything is filed. The morning Gerald Obinna signed that termination letter was the last morning he had certainty about anything, because while Kelvin was walking Adeze to the glass doors and not looking at her, she was already dialing the number of the person who had been holding the file for 6 months, who had been waiting for exactly this, who had known that eventually, one way or another, the documents would find their way home. If someone handed you a letter that told you who you actually were, not who the world had been treating you as, but who you actually were, with your name on the right papers at last, what would you do first? Leave your answer in the comments. I genuinely want to read it. Subscribe for more stories about hidden strength, quiet power, and the people the world overlooks until they change everything. I'll see you in the next one.